The intention is really to introduce the Akashic Records. We can go well beyond that. So what I have kind of on the list is like Akashic Records 101, this big question of like difference between intuition, guidance, and ego, and how we can determine what those each are. Would love to talk about the differences in reading for people and businesses, and also talk a little bit about reading for businesses in general. But we'll see how far and how deep we go. And then in general as well, talking a little bit about psychic development and fine tuning. Not that, by the way, you really need to practice psychic development to get into the Akashic Records, but I think whenever you can bring the two of those together, sometimes it feels a little bit more magical, right? A little bit easier to get into there. And then I saw a few questions that you guys asked, so I've noted those. But if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat as we go through. I'm going to try to hit the ones that you guys have asked throughout, just a little bit of a spiel, but I don't have too much of a spiel plan, so we'll see just what comes through. Yeah, and then anything that comes up with any of you as we get started, anything that you're curious about, thinking about, weighing on your heart, that you definitely are like absolutely want to get into before the end of the 90 minutes, feel free to drop that into the chat as well. Okay, so the Akashic Records in general. My notes are over here, by the way, so if you see me looking this way, that's what I'm looking at, my other monitor. But the Akashic Records in general, so as I know them and as I teach them, they are really just another dimension of consciousness that we access. And that it's this other dimension of consciousness that contains like all records of every instance of our soul. So every like, oh, this is Mighty Networks, by the way, beeping. Let me just make sure that's not someone trying to get into the meeting because it's a message. Okay, amazing, perfect. We are good. Where was I? Yes, so the Akashic Records is another dimension of consciousness that holds the records, we could say records of, I think that's the best way our language can process it, but every instance of every soul. So like every thought, every word, every action you've ever done, that you've thought to do, that you possibly could have done, that you might think in the future or act on in the future, like potentially do in the future, all of that for your soul, past lives, future lives, all states of existence are included in the Akashic Records. Other texts refer to the Akashic Records as the Book of Life. Some people say it's like a vibrational record of every soul in its journey. I actually really love that, thinking of it that way, like vibrational record. And one of my first teachers in accessing the records talked about the records as well as the pathway itself to get into the records as a vibrational pathway. So it's by saying a set of words, making a set of vibrations that allows us to shift that level of consciousness. I won't say that that's the end all be all though, because in order to access the records, there are like an infinite number of pathways and an infinite number of ways to do it. And for me, what I've learned is it's more about setting that intention than it is about saying a slew of words. However, as you get started, verbally out loud saying the words often helps us make that shift in consciousness a little bit easier and helps us become a little bit more aware of that. So I'll give actually two different pathway prayers to use, two different slews of words, as I like to say, or like strings or threads of words that you might possibly use. And so one of them was developed by myself and Helen Vonderheide, and it was developed specifically for me and for anybody that I want to read for. But I feel really safe and comfortable passing it on. Just know that it's one that you may have to tweak a little bit for it to work more for you. And then I'm also going to share the pathway that's in Linda Howe's book. So this is an amazing book, by the way, if anybody's interested in just starting to dive into the records on their own. It's I don't know how old it is actually. Maybe it was written in like the 90s, I'm not sure, but it's an amazing book. So it also talks about what the records are. It talks about like who the masters, teachers, ancestors, loved ones are. It talks about how we actually can speak and channel. And then it gives like a bunch of different pathways as well that you can practice and access, and some different guidance. It's something that whenever I'm teaching the records, I always like to refer to, because it was kind of like my base knowledge as well for accessing. And there's a really beautiful meditation in there. So if we have time, we'll step through that as well. Let's see what else. Oh, so vibrational record of every soul's journey. It's also referred to as the light body of universal self-awareness. And I really love this as well, because when we think about the Akashic records, we're not just accessing, like we are accessing another dimension. We're accessing all possibilities of every instance of every soul. But typically we access for our soul or for another beings that we've asked permission from. But it really is like in a beautiful introduction into like light work in general. So people who will talk about being light workers or, oh, no worries at all, Jess. I'm sending so much love to you. And I'm excited for you to watch the replay and to hear how it goes. We're having some Wi-Fi issues, which is totally fine. Oftentimes these things actually, I feel like, are never coincidental, by the way. But yes, so also known as the light body of universal self-awareness. And I really like this idea of the Akashic records as well. Whenever we're accessing them, it's not just like this. I like to think of them actually as like all parallel dimensions, like brought together in one space, right? Not that space is measurable in the way that we measure space, like that might not be the right word for it. But I love this idea of universal self-awareness and universal consciousness as well, because it's like an indicator that it goes well beyond us, which is going to be a key distinction whenever we start talking about intuition versus guidance. What comes from us, what comes from something else, what is something else, like how, like what constitutes that, right? So we can definitely talk to that. I mentioned this already, but we access the Akashic records by what I like to call a pathway. Or a string of words. So this is how I will teach you all to access the Akashic records. This is how I'll talk about it. But there are other readers and teachers of the records who maybe don't even speak anything out loud. And so keep that in mind. Again, there are an infinite number of ways to access. In Your Soul's Purpose group coaching yesterday, one of the cohort, she's like an avid reader of the records, and so she was talking about using my prayer versus her prayer and like what really works for her. But what you find is as you start practicing it, you really like find your own way and then you like hold on to that really tightly. Like I was asking, you know, how did the prayer that I gave you worked? And she's like, oh, I really like mine. But I tried it, right? And it's one of those things that, yeah, it's like you kind of find what works best for you and then you hold on to that, and that's beautiful and that's perfect. Let me see. And again, so accessing is really just an intention that allows us to subtly shift our consciousness so that we can connect through spirit. And then how we access the information itself. So as we're accessing information from the records, it's not necessarily that like we, especially our human form or even our intuition. So the records and our intuition are two very different things. And our intuition doesn't need to be like honed very well in order to be in the records and accessing the records and reading from the records. Because what we're often doing when we're in the records is we're translating information received to us from like the masters, the teachers, the ancestors, the loved ones, from other beings and other energy sources that are like giving us access to the information that we need. One of my teachers likes to say that we're accessing from our oversoul, and I really love this as well because it's like our soul is choosing for us the information that we need to receive, and then that's the only information that we get. We'll never get information that our soul does not want or need us to know in the moment. We'll never get information that we can't handle, is another way to say it, right? Like we're never going to get something that we're not meant to get or we're not supposed to get, especially when we set the right and the highest intention as we go in. And so another thing, kind of random actually, but as we access the records through the oversoul, we do this particularly because when we're reading for other people as well, the records are a dimension of consciousness. And just by accessing the records, we're changing the present moment that we're living in right now for ourselves and for other people, right? It's kind of like the butterfly effect. It's like, just by going into the records, there's a shift that's happening and occurring in our lives. And so it's really important when we read for other people that we always ask permission. And it's also really important that when we read for other people, we're always going through their oversoul. So we're ensuring that the information we're receiving for them is coming from their soul. Their soul's retrieving the information, giving us the information and we're translating that across. One of my teachers explained this to me as when we're not going through the oversoul, we essentially are becoming karmically responsible for whatever information we're pulling out for another person, which makes total sense, right? Because if we're just like shifting around in someone else's records and it's not their oversoul that's giving it to us, even if it's our soul and it's our highest level, right, that's shifting around, we're still shifting around in someone else's space, and we're literally changing their life by shifting around in that. And then the information that we give to them could potentially literally change their life as well, right? And so we never want to hold karma for someone else because you never know like if that's going to be good karma or not good karma. So just a little tip, if you're ever reading for another being, always asking for permission, always setting the intention to work through their oversoul, huge importance, just to keep yourself safe and protected. Not that anything massively terrible is going to happen. Let's see what else. Oh, anyone can access the Akashic Records. This was a question. This is a common question that I get. Anyone can access the Akashic Records. They can access it for themselves. Again, with permission, we can always read for other people. You don't have to have special gifts or talents. You don't have to be super connected to your intuition as well. So it's not one of those things like the more connected you are, the better you'll be at reading the records. It's more of like, the more practice you have in the records, the easier it will be to read and translate from the records. But it's not one of those things of like, you have to be really grounded or you have to meditate every day or anything like that. It's like, literally it's available to you, especially if you're here and you feel the call and you're interested, it's available to you. If you're drawn even in the slightest, it's available to you. Oftentimes what's really fascinating is I don't think we ever find or hear about the records until it's like our time to explore the records in some way or capacity. So yes, just know that if you have interest, it's possible. Let's see what else. Okay, I'm going to pause for just a second. Are there any questions that come up here, or are you guys still feeling pretty good? Everything makes sense? Yeah.
Yeah, everything makes sense till now.
Amazing. Thank you. Okay, so some teachers provide guidelines to accessing the records. I am not one of those teachers. If any of you are in Your Soul's Purpose, my group container, I literally the first week I don't even do this intro. I just give them the access prayer and say, go read this somewhere and see what happens. I'm like, this is for you. Because we're doing a masterclass, context I think is nice. But in general, me as a teacher, I believe that we over contextualize things, especially in our education system. Like we have to give background and we have to give context, and we're like, no, don't do, wait, listen first. Me as a teacher, I'm like, let's try, right? Like, let's experience and let's experiment by learning, because it's your experience ultimately that's going to teach you way more than anything else will teach you. Because when you experience something, whether it's good or bad, whether you make a mistake or you do it perfectly, you'll remember it and it's always going to be there. Whereas like if I just regurgitate a bunch of things out to you and you like, you'll keep some of it, but not all of it. And then when you're in the records, like maybe some of it will be helpful, but most of those things always click after. So I'm one of those people that I like to like give you what you need so that you can do it, and then give you context later so that you can connect the dots, because oftentimes it sticks better, right? But since we're here and doing a masterclass, I will give a couple of guidelines that I've received. So I set my own guidelines whenever I read the records for myself. And they're really simple for me. Some people have like a whole long list of guidelines. And by guidelines, I mean like not in the spirit of being rigid, like in having a set ritual or a thing that you have to do every single time, but in the spirit of starting to learn and understand what works best for you. And so for me, I very rarely, I don't know that I've ever opened my records if I've been drinking, if I've engaged in any type of drugs. Not saying that any of that's wrong or bad, just personally, I don't do that. I absolutely do not read for anyone else if I've been drinking or engaging in any type of drugs, because that just to me doesn't feel an integrity and responsible. For other people, might be totally fine. And then the only other thing, and this is something that I will say, I've already said, but I will ask that you adopt this in your guidelines, to not read for anyone unless you have permission to read for them. It's the records are one of those things, like it's once you start to work in them and then you have a question about another person, it's so easy to be like, I'm just going to open their records and like find out. But it's best not to, and it's best to always ask for permission. Also, occasionally you can access, but most of the time it's pretty guarded because we have like the masters and the teachers and the loved ones, which we'll talk a little bit about, that are really like the keepers and the holders of this space, of this dimension that we go to. A couple of tips and tricks for deeper connection. So if you haven't opened your records before, the first, I would say 5 to 25 times you open your records, give yourself at least 15 minutes in your records. So try not to spend less than 15 minutes, 15 full minutes in your records. And this is just to allow your body and your consciousness to shift fully into that like new subtle consciousness, or new subtle level of consciousness. So 15 minutes at minimum. As you first get started, I would say 15 minutes to a full hour. As you start practicing and you're in your records more and more and more, that time can be smaller and smaller and smaller because you'll receive a lot faster. That's the first thing. The other thing is to allow yourself to explore and experiment with where you open the records, how you open the records, what you're doing when you open the records. The first few times I opened the records, I lived in this really tiny apartment on the beach with my boyfriend, and like, it small, like 400 square feet small. And so there was not a lot of space to like have alone time. So I would go into the bathroom, close the door, sit in the bathtub. I turned all the lights out and I would sit there and I would open my records that way. I would say the opening prayer out loud. And I used to just sit for 15 to 20 minutes to see if anything came through. I always had like a notebook and a pen with me. And then that's my other tip, is to always take pen, paper, pencil and paper with you when you go into the records, wherever you are. Unless you're experimenting with, like, another really great thing to try is opening your records and like going for a walk. So if you go for a walk, just take something like a voice recorder so that you can record anything that comes through or drops into your body. Yeah, and then allow yourself to play with it and have fun. I think the thing that happens when we start opening the records is we overthink it and the mind starts working and we're like, am I getting something? Am I making that up? Am I crazy? Is that me? Is that my ego? Is that my intuition? Are those my guides? And like the mind can spiral out. When you open the records, this is another important thing. When you open the records, like, it is a subtle shift in consciousness, but you're still going to be in your same state of consciousness. It's almost like, Jenny, you'll be familiar with this, but like self-hypnosis. When you like hypnotize or self-hypnotize, you're not like totally zonked, right? Like, you still have the ability to like hear and sense and feel what's around you. Like, maybe it's a deeper meditative state. The records isn't even that. It's like not even that deep, like the state that you go in whenever you're even being like self-hypnotized, right? Like this, the records are even more subtle. So allow yourself time for the shift. Be gracious with yourself if you don't feel or notice the shift at first. And then allow yourself the time and the space to explore what works for you while you calm and settle the mind so that you can receive. And then my other thing is, once you start trying to read the records, just write everything down. Whatever you think you're getting, like, don't allow yourself to question it. If you hear the word socks, like, write the word socks down, no matter how weird you think it is, or wild or crazy, or whatever the experience is, no matter how close it is to the way that you normally think about something, write it down. Because the other thing is, as we're receiving information, we're translating it at all times. And we're going to translate in the way that makes sense to us based on the experiences that we have, right? So it's very rare that like a word or a vocabulary phrase is going to drop into your body that you don't already know or don't have experience with. Essentially, like when that happens, like when there's a meaning or something dropping into your body that you don't have vocabulary for, you'll feel that. But it's rare that like brand new words drop in, right? And so don't expect like this profound experience, but know that your translation into like English form is going to be limited also to your English form. And that's okay. So whatever comes through, allow it to come through. And then the other thing is, like, some people, when they're receiving from the records, will literally hear voices and hear voices that are not their voices. The majority of people, when they are hear their own voice. This is really important to note, because I think when you hear your own voice, you're like, I'm not hearing anything else. I must be saying this to myself and I must be making this up. But you're probably not making this up, and you're probably not saying it to yourself. It is like, that is the voice that you know. It's very rare that you'll hear like a very distinctive other voice, right? Like, it's still the voice that's in your head. So be aware of that. Although some people do hear audibly very different voices. So know that. And you might be one of those people if you have that gift or skill or opening. But for me personally, the majority of the time when I'm reading for myself or someone else, it's all my voice, but I will know when it's a different energy. And so it's just going to be starting to feel the different energies that you're working with and like noticing those energies that are dropping in as you're receiving. Okay, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let me pause again. I want to talk about questions that we can ask and explore. I'll go back into what to expect when you read for the first time as well. I kind of skipped ahead to go to that, and I'll go back to the how. But are there any questions coming up from any of you right now, or any thoughts or feelings?
So if we do hear voices, we've never accessed the records, what's the difference between that and hearing voices in other scenarios?
Yeah, this is a really great question. This is such a good question. Okay, so there are almost like different levels of divine guidance, we could say. I don't like to use the word levels because like none of them are actually like above or beneath each other, right? But one, I'll say if you hear voices, like definitely signal of like clairaudient gift, intuitive gift, intuitive way of channeling pretty regularly, and very likely you're could be accessing actually guides from the records, right? Totally could be accessing like spirits, kind of from the medium perspective. Let's see. Okay, yeah, and I'm like, okay, yeah, so the difference will be when you're in the records, you're accessing a lot, it's like a different level of divine guidance. That being said, could be a member of your spirit team that's in the records that also always hangs out with you and talks to you. And that being said, the Akashic Records is not something that we always have to set the intention to connect to. So something that I learned when I was reading the records is that I'm always connected to the records. You're always connected to the records. Like that's why we all have access, because at any time we can make that subtle shift and access the records. I'm like, how can I really answer this question? Yeah, and so the guidance may be the same regardless of whether you're in it or not. And the being that's speaking to you may be the same regardless of whether you're in it or not. Actually, yeah, that's just the answer. It like could totally be the same being or the same energy. I feel like there's something else here though. So I'm like, let's try to feel into this. Yeah, and I'm just asking the question if like our masters, teachers, ancestors, and loved ones and guides. So these are all the people I reference whenever all the beings that I reference whenever I access the records, if they're available to us at all times. And the answer I think is yes. It's like a full resounding deep yes. I think maybe the biggest difference is when we're in the records, we're accessing like a bigger state of universal consciousness, whereas like when we're moving around and about in our own life, especially when we're receiving from intuition, we're accessing from like a slice of that consciousness, which is our basic human experience. But the voices are coming from elsewhere, right? Like very rarely would you hear a voice that's in another voice that's definitely not yours. However, like when we're intuiting, so like let's say the voice is our voice, when we're intuiting and we're not accessing the records, there is a definite distinction between what our intuition is and what like actual guidance is, whether that be by like a spirit entity, loved one, ancestor being, whether that be by like a teacher or a loved one in the records, versus like us and our higher selves. And then like our higher selves unconnected to the records, like us and our higher selves in our like human being form, when we're intuiting things, will receive things differently than when we're like intentionally, subtly shifting our consciousness and being in the records. And it's just like bigger picture view versus like smaller human picture view. So like one of my teachers explains it like, if you're an actor on stage and a light shines on you, like, you know, you have the spotlight on you, that's like your intuition. And like, that's like your capability of seeing when you're in your intuition. It's like this slice of light. Whereas like when all the lights turn on, that's like being in the records. It's like your perspective just widens so greatly because your access becomes so much more, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
That totally makes sense.
Cool. Any other questions there?
Yeah. So how often can we read them?
You can read them as often as you want to. There is no limit. And what I would say is, especially when you first start reading them, more is better. And more is better in terms of like, allow yourself to experiment. Do you receive better when you're taking a shower? Do you receive better when you're looking out the window? Do you receive better when you're sitting in a closet? Do you receive better when you're walking? What feels the best in your body? Where do you feel the most comfortable? Over time, you'll receive like in all places, but in the beginning, it's kind of just like starting to allow your body to really open up and starting to allow messages to drop in and really seeing like what works the best for you. Somebody that was in YSP last night was talking about her experience practicing over the last few weeks. And she said that she realized at night she was too tired. So when she first started practicing, she practiced at night. And she realized she was too tired. And then so when she started practicing in the morning, she got more downloads and she received more things. And so that's another thing to notice, like open your records for 15 minutes in the morning, see how that feels. Open your records again for 15 minutes at night. Another thing you could do is set one time every day and go into your records for a little while, at least 15 minutes every single day. And the benefit of that is, or just like plan whenever you're going to do the next one. I say this because when I first was playing around in the records, I would sometimes receive a lot and sometimes have trouble receiving. And what my teacher told me then was to let them know when I would be there. Like she was like, literally set a time with your guides and let them know when you're coming. And then they will come for you and, you know, see what happens there. And so you could do that where whenever you're leaving the records, you know, set another time. You can even ask yourself, when is a good time to do this again? And you'll know. And what I'll say is like, probably what I've seen and what's common with people I work with will be, once you start accessing the records, it's like every day for a couple of months. And then slowly over time, you'll ease your way out. And then you'll start to access them only when you feel called. And you'll start to feel called less and less because it's almost like you'll need that guidance less and less. But then also you'll realize you're dropping in at random moments and connecting at random moments as well. Is that helpful?
Yes, perfect.
Let's see what else. Okay, so types of questions to ask and explore. This is like a really juicy one. Like we could have a whole masterclass, I think, on developing the proper questions to ask in the records. I shouldn't use the word proper, by the way, because any question is great and is good. But the quality of your answers are almost always going to be determined by the quality of your questions. So asking really good questions is going to like really help you get the information that you want and that you need, and asking a lot of questions and asking questions that go around the thing that you're interested in are really going to help you. The general guidance. So I actually kind of like pulled some things from my teachers. One, time doesn't exist in the records the same way it exists for us. So the records exist everywhere, all the time, like in all space, all dimensions, all at once. So we're always in the here and now when we access the records. And so asking a when question may or may not produce an answer that's true and real in the human experience. That being said, there are some teachers that are very skilled at like sifting through and receiving time and slices of time and getting that. And I say this because I've gone to readers multiple times over and over again to ask certain questions of when can I expect this? And they mostly always will have an answer and it always seems to align. Whereas personally, I'm usually not great at finding the time or receiving an answer when it comes to time. So that may be a practice thing. I'm not really sure, but I've heard from other teachers as well to be, you know, time doesn't exist in the records, and that makes total sense to me. So I'm like, okay. Yes or no questions. People ask about this. Yes or no questions are totally fine. You can ask yes or no questions in the records. You will always get an answer. However, they're not always like advise. So people oftentimes, a lot of guides will say it's best to avoid yes or no questions, especially when you're starting out. And so the number one reason behind this is when you ask a yes or no question, specifically, should I do X or should I do Y, right? Or like, should I do X even, yes or no? If you get a yes or a no and you follow it, it diminishes your power by putting the decision making in someone else's hands. And so there are some guides and teachers that will guide you away from using yes or no questions, because at the end of the day, you are still accountable for your own being. And so it's important for you to choose and choose for yourself. And so a better question, if you're wondering, should I do X, would be to ask, what's the best possible outcome of me doing X? If I continue down this path, what's the best possible outcome? If I continue down this path, what's the worst possible outcome? You could even ask, if I continue down this path, what is the likely outcome? Like, those are really great questions as well. And then always to ask questions around those, because again, you're still kind of like narrowing down. You want the full picture. And when you're in the records, you have access to the full picture. So it's like, how can you take advantage of that? And then the other reason not to use yes and no questions are, again, they don't provide a full picture. So even asking, like, let's say, if I continue down this path, should I continue down this path? Yes or no? Like, maybe the answer is yes. A really good follow-up would be like, what are the implications of that? What's the most likely outcome if I continue down this path? Why? What lesson am I here to learn? What, what is this, even if we're thinking about like relationships, like what lesson is this person bringing to me in my life? What cycle am I completing by, working with this person or being in relationship with this person? Like, those are all really great questions, and will just tell you so much more than yes or no. But what I will say is your body and your intuition and your gut is really good at answering yes or no questions for you. And this is a really good way to connect to your intuition, by the way. So like, I always guide my clients, students, friends, family, souls into yes or no practice, just to start to reconnect to the intuition and reconnect with what we want. And so, records aside, it's a really great practice in your intuition to just start feeling and understanding what a yes feels like in your body and what a no feels like in your body. And oftentimes, like when if you work with me, like I'm thinking about you, Jenny, even because we talk a lot about like only following through with things that are like full fuck yes, right? Like, that's a big thing that we like to talk about. I like to talk about with a lot of people. But when we're clear on what a yes and a no feels like in our body, we might come into a situation where the body tells us no, but like the mind tells us yes. Or like even the heart might say yes, but then the body's saying no. And so that's a really great situation to take into the records and to ask for more clarity around, of like, hey, my body said no to this thing. My mind says yes. I think my heart says yes. What's going on here? What's behind this? Is there an experience that is keeping me from this? Is there an energy block in my body? Is there something I've experienced in a past life that's holding me from this? Is there a reason? Is there a lesson to be learned? Like, those are really great things to explore. And then actually, while we're talking about this, we can just go a little bit more into like the difference between intuition and guidance. So your intuition is your inner voice. Your intuition is your definitely connecting to your higher self. It's your gut feeling. Your intuition is the feeling that you get in your gut. And intuitive information is inherent within yourself. So it comes from within you. It lives within the eternal divine. So the thing that connects you to the universe, right? Like source. Your intuition is connected to that. It's totally connected to source. And it's you making contact with that divine energy inside of you. So whenever you're listening to your intuition or calling in your intuition, that's what you're doing. The answers and the information that you receive are always going to be related to what you're feeling or experiencing in the moment, however. And this is why your intuition shifts and changes throughout the day, throughout weeks, throughout months. This is why, like, sometimes something will feel like a yes to you, and 4 hours later, it might feel like a no to you, the same thing. Your intuition is going to shift and change because it's connected to you and your experiential moments. It's connected to you, like, in the here and the now. And your intuitive answers will help you solve your immediate problems. They'll also help you understand your gut feelings at a deeper level. Depending on how developed you are, how connected you are in your intuition, like the depth of your responses will vary, and like even the steadiness of your responses will vary when you're working with your intuition. The records don't, again, they don't rely on your intuition. The information you're receiving is not only from your higher self, like it is absolutely from your higher self, but it's from your higher self, like your soul level self, that like has the perspective of your souls across all of your lived experience. And so again, it's like that being in the spotlight versus like seeing the light all around you. Your intuition, while it's amazing, is not going to guide you through everything, because it is also based on your experience. Whereas when you're accessing yourself in the records and you're accessing your guides in the records, it's going to span your experience across past, present, and future. So it's like a much deeper, wider, farther reach of experience and guidance than is just your intuition. And it's also like, so Akashic wisdom, it comes from outside of you, but you can access it through yourself. And it's you tapping into that divine consciousness as a whole. So again, the answers that you get can span the entire universe. And again, every single lifetime that your soul has ever lived. So when you get an intuitive hit on something, like going to the records to get deeper on that is a really, really great practice. Oftentimes when I'm making a decision in life, or I'm unsure about something in life and my intuition's telling me something really strongly, but I don't know why my intuition's guiding me that way, I will go to the records. And this is a really great practice as well, because it's like before you develop the story and then like justify the thing that you want, because a lot of times it's hard to decipher between the intuition and our ego, right? Because the things that we want are on so many different levels. Like we have the human desires that exist within us. We have like the bodily desires that exist within us. We have like the intellectual desires, emotional desires. Sometimes the things that we want are not the things that are best for us. Sometimes we can't determine what's best for us, because sometimes it's not the mind, sometimes it's not the body, sometimes it's all of the things, right? So when you have that conflict or confusion of like, you really want something, like oftentimes when we really want something, we'll think that our intuition is the thing that's guiding us to that. But sometimes we don't always want the thing that's best for us, right? So we can totally deceive ourselves in that way. So again, the records are a really great place for when you're not sure, like, what's my intuition telling me? You can pop into the records. Another great practice actually is throwing down some tarot cards too, like in a very quick way, because it's tangible. And your cards are never going to lie to you. So if you think you want and need X, let's just say X to keep it like totally neutral. Let's say you think you want and need X, and you throw down a tarot card, you might be like, oh, X is not the very best thing for me right now. And then you could even take that with you into the records and try to understand, like, why is this not the best thing for me right now? What's the lesson that I'm learning here? What am I meant to know? Yes. And Casey said, very informative, can't speak, seems similar to tapping into your psychic abilities. Okay, yes, I love that you said this. So I think this is why it's so hard for me to answer Jenny's question earlier too. So I have this theory, by the way. This is totally my theory. This is not from a book. This is not from a teacher. This is not from a guide at all whatsoever. But what I will say is I totally have this theory that whenever we are accessing psychic abilities in any way, shape, or form, we're actually accessing the records. There's one psychic that I worked with one time, and I was telling her that I was practicing in the records. Now, I've worked with her more than once, but when I was telling her that I was practicing in the Akashic Records, she told me, how do you think it is that I access all the information that I do whenever I'm reading for you or anyone? And I was like, oh, I don't know. Through your gifts and your abilities, right? Like through the gifts that you have, because that's something that we're taught so much in the spiritual space. And a lot of people will say, like, I'm intuitive versus saying psychic, because like psychic feels like this, it feels like this strong, almost trigger word, right? It's like a very stereotypical word and stereotypical space. And so a lot of people will lean and say I'm intuitive. And then also, similar to the Akashic Records, like I love talking about working in the Akashic Records because it's a space that seems very, what's the word here? It's like very, intimidating for people. The Akashic, even people who like practice in the psychic space and psychic realm, Akashic Records is like, it seems like this, I don't know, really big thing that like we're worried if we can actually do it or not. And I have this theory too, by the way, when people are like, I'm intuitive but not psychic, that it's the same fear of like, I'm not as connected as the other person. Like, I think that's the root of that. I'm not as connected as that person. So I'm going to claim that I'm intuitive, not psychic, because I can't read your thoughts. And I know I can't read your thoughts. I feel like that's what's behind that energy, right? And same thing of the Akashic Records, like even people who practice in the healing space or the psychic space or the intuitive space, which is all the same thing, by the way. There's this fear of like, I'm not as connected as the next person. So like, can I read them really? And if I read them, what will I get? And if I don't get the thing that I want, then that must mean that I'm not as connected or I'm not as good as the next person. And so there's like I don't know, there's like a root level of connection behind all of it. And what I would say is, especially because as I started really deepening my practice in the records, I realized again that I've been connected my entire life, as have all of you. Like we all are connected to universal consciousness. Of course, where does our consciousness come from even, right? And so the Akashic Records are really not this like thing to intimidate you. It's a thing that we all have access to. And when it comes to psychic abilities, I believe as well that we are all psychic. We are all able to perceive. Like psychic to me, well, not even just to me, but if you look it up, one of the definitions is of the soul. And like we all have the ability to access our soul. We all have that ability. We all have the ability to access souls around us. We all have the ability to drop into different levels of consciousness and states of consciousness and beings of consciousness and pools of consciousness. And so from that perspective, Casey, I feel like if it's not just similar to accessing and tapping into psychic abilities, like it to me, it's like it's the same exact thing. The beautiful thing about the records is like, anyone who most people who read them will say exactly what I said. Anybody has access. Whereas I feel like in the space of psychic, the stereotypical space of psychic realm, it doesn't feel that same way, right? Like we feel like we need to be invited. We feel like we need to have a gift. We feel like we need to be told that we have an ability. We feel like somebody needs to like see us and our talent and tell us about it so that we can like step fully into it, right? Which I think is one, really off-putting, and two, just not true. I think like we all have the ability, like 100%, I think we all have the ability. And yeah, I think we all have the ability. And it's not even about learning which abilities we have. I think we're all just as connected as the next people. And it's just starting to hone those connections the way that we want to, the way that works really well for us, right? And there are some people who we may feel are like super deeply connected, but I would just say they're well practiced. It's just like when you start anything, like I surf, so surfing's a really good example. Like the first time you go surfing, you're not going to be really great. Like it's going to be really clunky and it's going to be really hard, but you're still going to get a taste of it and you're going to experience it. And then the more you do it and the more you do it and the more you do it, the easier it's going to be, the more graceful you're going to be, the easier it will feel, the better you're going to start looking while you're doing it. But you're still going to fall. You're still going to have sessions where you go out and it just sucks and it's really frustrating and you're like not catching the waves you want to. I think the same thing is true of practicing in the psychic space and practicing in the records. Of like the first time you open your records, it's probably not going to be this profound experience. Like it's probably going to be pretty clunky. It's probably going to be a lot of like, am I doing this right? Am I receiving? How do I receive? What's the best way for me to listen? And that's okay. Like embrace that and know and give yourself grace and compassion, knowing that you're not doing anything wrong and that you have perfect ability and capability to access, and that with practice, you'll strengthen those muscles and you'll deepen them. And this is why I say open them as much as you want to, especially in the beginning. Another really good tip is if you have friends and family and people, like you guys all on this call actually can reach out to each other in the community space and read for each other. Like that will really open you up. And by that, I mean, when you're reading for another person, you second guess yourself a lot less, because you'll get something and you'll just say it because you're like, I'm just going to say it. And then the other person's going to be like, oh, that totally resonates. And this is why. And then you're gonna be like, oh, I'm not crazy. And then it will allow you to feel what it feels like to just channel in general. So then when you're channeling for yourself, you'll be like, okay, yeah, like that's totally something that's coming through, or this feeling that I'm feeling in my shoulder totally means something. Let me lean into that more. Whereas like when you're just starting to channel for only yourself, it's harder to give yourself that grace and compassion and time to even allow yourself to explore it, because it's so easy to just shut down and be like, I can't do this. It's so easy to shut down and be like, I'm not getting anything. And that's okay too. I think be graceful for those times, because they will come even after years of practicing. Okay, I'm going to pause again. Any questions? No? Okay. Okay, we'll keep going. So speaking of that then, how do we channel our information when we access the records? This is a beautiful tie when we talk about our psychic gifts and abilities, which, by the way, no one has special gifts. We all receive information differently. And like my latest theory is that the way we listen to other people and receive information from other people is very similar to how we receive in the records. So if you're like a visual learner, for example, practicing visualization in the records is really going to help you. If you're someone that needs to listen to something, practicing like hearing and listening is really going to help you. If you're a very emotional person and you like to feel through things, or if you like your mirroring ability of other people, like your empathy is like all-time high, that may be how you receive things. Very likely you're going to receive all of that in like very different ways, and it looks different for everyone. What I will say is, oftentimes I'll be reading for someone and I'll say, what I heard was XYZ. And by that, sometimes I mean there's a voice that I heard that said XYZ. Most of the time, what I mean when I say what I heard is a phrase dropped into my body, or a feeling dropped into my body. And this is how I would describe that feeling to you. That's what I'm actually saying. But to say what I heard is easier. It makes more sense, and people receive that, right? And then that's what naturally comes out for me often too. You may see things like when you close your eyes, you may see like a full picture, but sometimes you might just see like light or color or no color, or you might have an experience while your eyes are closed that will maybe like prompt you to say what I saw was, or what I'm seeing is. But it's not like this. Again, it's not like this, especially when you begin, it's not like this profound thing of you're like literally dropping into an experience and there's another being in front of you that you see and you talk to. Some people will absolutely experience this. Like, I don't want to discount that, but if that's not what happens, don't panic. You're doing it right. It's totally normal. And then again, like feeling or experiencing emotional or physical sensations in the body. So sometimes when and by the way, when you're channeling for other people, this is going to shift. So every person that I read for, my experience is different. Almost every time I read for myself, my experience is different. Although I'm pretty used to now how I receive. And so what you'll notice is sometimes the channels that other people are more open in receiving to, those are the channels you'll receive from whenever you're reading for another person. And then there are different areas in the body sometimes where information will drop in. So personally, I know 100% of the time if I'm receiving information from my solar plexus, that's like an area where I generally will channel. If I'm getting information from this place ever, it's 100% not me. Like, that's not my mind or my brain. Like, that's definitely coming in from somewhere else. Sometimes I will get information like that feels like it's coming through my head. Sometimes I'll feel it in different areas of the body. So just be open to, like, if you open your records and you feel the shift and you feel like one area of your body even like feel heavier or like light up or change, like lean into that area and like ask it, how old are you? What can I learn from you? What would you have me know? Why is my arm tingling, or whatever the thing is, like lean into that. And then it's like pulling out information. And at the beginning, it's like pulling out clues of information, because you're like, I'm getting this feeling. And then over time, like your ability to translate and pull all that information together and synthesize will get better and better and better and better. Yeah. And so the senses that we experience when we're reading in the records, or even like using our psychic abilities, are beyond the words for the senses that we have, right? It's beyond actually seeing, it's beyond actually hearing, it's beyond like touching and feeling, although we absolutely can still experience those senses 100%. But I don't know that there's a vocabulary for like the full and actual experience of when you're reading or channeling. And again, I think it's really different for a lot of people. So a lot of teachers, and I totally second this, and this is why in YSP I just gave everyone the prayer and said, go try it. I didn't want to give anyone any expectations, because like you don't want to like go into it thinking that you're going to have this certain experience, and then you might have an experience but like totally miss it because you're focused on this other thing that you think is going to happen. So my biggest guidance to you, if you're newer and you're like if you're about to go open the records for the first time, like go do it with zero expectation. And then literally everything you experience when you're doing it, like write it down and don't discount it. Like, and if it's like the word sock comes through, or you feel like the air touch your cheeks and like you think you're just noticing it, but like actually there's a feeling there, write it down. You just write it down and then let yourself lean into it and explore it. And what I'll say is like oftentimes we'll shut ourselves down before we lean into and explore the thing. But the more you can dedicate yourself and lean into and explore the thing, the deeper it will get. It's almost like synchronicities in life. Like the more you notice them, the more they show up, right? Like even angel numbers, like the more you start seeing the angel numbers, the more they'll like come up all the time. And you're like, oh my gosh, like these numbers are popping up all the time. The same thing will happen like as you're reading something. And so for example, for me, there was a moment in time where I felt like I was not as connected. And I was like, I think my third eye is blocked. I don't know if someone told me that, or if I was like, I think my third eye is blocked. I like went to a special energy massage therapist to work on it. It was really intense. And then she gave me this practice of candle meditation, Tratak. This is my favorite, like favorite way to connect with spirit when I feel like I'm disconnected, by the way. It's like you literally just take a candle like this. Usually it's longer, so this one's kind of half burned, but with the flame that's kind of big, and you'll just light it and you'll set it down. I have this little, actually I have one right here. I have this little thing that I set it in. You just set it down. And what I love to do when I'm feeling not so connected is I'll do everything I can to relax my body. So I might take a bath or something like that, drink some chamomile tea. I'll get in bed, turn all the lights off, light my candle. So like it's totally pitch black except for my candle. And then I stare at my candle. You don't have to be pitch black, by the way, but I like to do it this way because it's like only one thing to focus on. You stare at the candle. I'll stare at my candle until my eyes water. So I'll hold my eyes open, staring at it until my eyes water. Once my eyes water, I'll close them and try to envision the candle in front of me. And the way that the traditional practice is, once the candle vision goes away from your eyes, you open your eyes again and you stare at the candle till your eyes water, then you close them and you look for the candle in your vision. For me, what I do is I'll close my eyes and there's all these little lights that are like moving around your eyes, of course, because it was like bright and then now it's dark. And then I like to follow those little lights in my eyes and just keep tracking those patterns for as long as I possibly can. And for me, this crazy thing happens where if I do it for long enough, like the whole visualization will open up, and like a lot of times I'll end up being face to face with my guides. And so this is like my favorite practice because I'm not a visual receiver. I very rarely channel through my eyes. Like sometimes it will be for other people. And so when I'm feeling really disconnected and I can make this happen, it feels really good and it really feels really fun. It's super tangible. So it's a nice practice. I offer it to you guys. Not saying that you'll have the same exact experience, but really like the point is allowing yourself to really lean into whatever the experience is so that it can deepen, as opposed to like if you feel a tingling in your arm and you're like, I feel this tingling in my arm, and then you just kind of like let it be and you move on to something else, like with your consciousness. It's like if you feel a tingling in your arm, like how can you focus in on the tingling in your arm? Like how can you describe the tingling in your arm with as much depth as possible? Like what color is it? How old is it? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it taste like? What does it smell like? Even asking all these questions, it will like deepen and you'll open yourself into this new space and experience, and you'll be like, oh, that's why my arm's tingling, you know, like things will come forward. So that's some guidance. Let's see. What else? Any questions? Cool. Okay. I kind of like took us off in a little bit of a rat hole, but that's okay. So a good question, by the way, is why access the records at all? I think everybody's here probably for a different reason. And whatever your reason is, it's completely valid and perfect and beautiful and okay. My reasoning and like why I love to read for other people and encourage it is like the number one reason is just the infinite source of love. It's like you access and tap into this infinite source of just like full acceptance and full love. And you get to see yourself from your soul perspective and from your guides' perspectives, which is always of love. So another thing to note is if you're in the records and you feel like you're maybe a negative presence, or you feel like irritable or frustrated, like know that those are feelings that maybe are coming up to explore with compassion and dive into, but that your guides are always going to be showering you in love, always going to be showering you in light. The highest perspective is not one that is judgmental at all. And so your guides will never, ever tell you what you need to do, tell you what you should do. They're never going to shame you. They're never going to be like, you shouldn't have done that. Ever, 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 ever. Oh, thank you, Marcia. I love you. Yes. And so your guides are always going to love and support you. And again, that's like my favorite reason for accessing the records. And this level of unconditional love offers a depth of healing as well, right? Like the records is a place that you can go to heal and transform so many things, especially like if you go in and you feel this, you feel like a perceived to be negative experience. I say perceived to be because like, I don't know, like let's say you open your records and you have a headache. Like if you can lean into that space of even pain or irritation and just ask like, what's the story behind this? What am I meant to learn from this? What's the experience from this? How old is this? You can maybe like tap into a past life that might be wanting to come up and heal a trauma from like ancient times. You can heal a trauma from childhood. And it's like healing trauma in a way that again is just like so full of love and compassion and grace that a lot of times our healing can be instantaneous. Whereas I think when we work in more traditional ways of like, not saying that therapy is bad or wrong, by the way, I love therapy. Like I'm a super big fan of therapy. But oftentimes like things like therapy take years, right? To get to sometimes the seed of one thing. Even doing past life regressions, if they're not like very intentional, can take years to find the right lifetime to find the thing that's actually providing the trauma that you're experiencing right now today. Whereas in the records, a lot of times we can collapse that timeline and find like the seed of the thing. As long as our soul is ready for us to know it, like it's accessible to us and we can access it and we can heal it. And it's this like beautiful thing. And a lot of times you can even just ask for that guidance. So there's not even I can't even give you like a how-to manual on healing yourself, because a lot of times you can go in and just ask like, what parts of me need to be healed? How can I do that? Can you help me? Can you help me through this? You know, it's like a very beautiful experience where, again, you don't have to have any skills. You don't have to have any knowledge. You don't have to have any experience. You can just go do this like 5 minutes from now, when we're, well, not 5 minutes, 30 minutes from now, whenever we close down our call. Okay, so let me see. So I answered the question, how often you should practice. How to know that we're doing it right. Okay. You're doing it right. You're definitely not going to be doing it wrong. But what I will say is allowing yourself the time, because especially, so I'll send you guys the prayer from Linda Howe's book. By the time you're done saying it out loud, your consciousness will shift, whether you feel it or not, like the shift will have occurred. So it's very important, by the way, to close the records when you're done reading them, especially when you open them so intentionally, because you want to, like, your body will get very tired operating in both states of consciousness if you just like have them open all the time. And so you may or may not feel the shift. That's the first thing. Like I used to, when I first started reading them, I knew I was reading the records because like my body used to vibrate. It was like this interesting thing where I could feel my whole body buzzing. And I was like, okay, I'm here. And sometimes I wouldn't get anything at all, or I thought I wasn't receiving anything at all, but I felt the transition in my body. So I was like, okay, I'm here. I will say there was a moment where I was like, am I making this up? Like, am I placebo affecting my body? Like, am I vibrating because I think I'm supposed to be vibrating, right? Like, I did have that question for a little while, but I don't believe that that was true. yeah, and then I'll say, like, again, just test it out in a lot of different ways, like go for walks, lay down, sit down, try meditating before, try going for a run. And then another great thing you can do is just writing. So when you channel, same thing with psychic abilities, but like when you channel, you can just write down your question and then just like let your pen go. And oftentimes you're going to write down the answer. And what's beautiful, so by the way, don't take my word for anything that I say. Like everything that I say and have said here and all the ways that I've answered your questions, I invite and encourage you to go test for yourselves, because I'm a fan of personal discernment. And what I'm sharing of you guys is what I've been taught, and also is always of my own experience. So like I am someone that doesn't ever take anything at face value, especially things in the spiritual space. I'm always like, I want to try that. And so I fully believe and support, and will never be offended if you're like, Maria, I tried that thing you said and it didn't work. Or I think that's total bullshit. I'm like, great. I'm so glad that you came to that conclusion. Like, keep trying. But like, truly, I mean that. And it comes from such a place of deep love, in that don't take what I'm saying like for truth, right? Like experience it for yourself, because you will, and you'll find the truth for yourself, right? And it doesn't have to be the same thing that I'm saying, and like that's totally great, and it's okay, and I will love that. And yeah, always experience things for yourself. Oh, so if there are not questions, I did want to talk about reading for other things like businesses and houses and buildings and pets and like grass and trees, because we can, so like everything that's in existence on our planet, whether we can see it or not, we can access the records for. There are like some guidelines from different teachers and readers on what's okay to access and what's not okay to access. I will say your intuition will always tell you what's okay. Anything that you own, like that you're in control of, we could say, you're able to access, like and it's totally fine, like your house, your home, you can absolutely access the records for your home. And I'll send you guys my personal pathway. You can just insert like your home's address instead of your name that you would use, or if you have a nickname for your home, you can use that as well. You can read the records for, I like to read the records for my house. Actually, the first time I connected to this house, the one that you guys see behind me, was when I was in the process of buying it. And I was talking to my spiritual coach, and I was like, I don't know if this is the right thing or not, but I feel really drawn to buying this house, but I don't know if I can afford the house. And she was like, why don't we just ask the house? And I was like, okay, yes. And I love always connecting in with the house to check in and see how things are going, if I'm taking care of the house the way that I should take care of the house, if there's something wrong with the house, if there's something that I should be like looking for. These are all things that I ask my house pretty regularly. Grass, like as the deeper you work in the records, the more you'll find like energy behind inanimate objects. So like grass is another thing that you can channel and like channel into from the records. Business is one of my favorite things ever to channel in the records, and ideas. Like if an idea, so the records is like this beautiful place too. Like when you get an idea to do something, so actually Kruti, this is really good for you, because I remember in Monetize Your Purpose, you were asking about like, how do I know which thing to start with, right? Like, what do I focus on? You can totally go into the records and ask, but you can not even just ask your guides and highest self, but you can ask like the blueprint of the business that you want to start, or the idea that you want to start. And you can literally talk to it and like ask it, like, am I the person that's meant to bring you to life? Does that timeline look like now, or does that timeline look like later? We'll say specific times are going to be very difficult, but you will feel like this is an immediate thing to take aligned action on, versus it feels like something I should be doing, but maybe not today. Like you'll totally pick up on that. And then as you read for like ideas and businesses, what's cool is you can ask like, what is the intention of this idea or business? What's the purpose behind this idea or business? What's the lifespan of it? Because sometimes ideas come to us. We'll have an idea for a project. I'm pretty sure all of you guys will empathize with this, but we'll get an idea for a project and we'll like work on it for 3 weeks really hardcore, and then all of a sudden we just like leave it and we never touch it again, right? It's because we're like in the energy of the thing for those 3 weeks. Like we're consumed by the energy. It's almost like our energies get married for a moment and then they're like, all right, we're done. And sometimes that's just the highest level vision of that idea and its expression in the planet for that moment in time, and like we fulfilled that thing that was coming to the planet. So sometimes, like I think oftentimes when we do this, there's like guilt and shame around it of like, oh, I should have done more. If I really would have leaned into that, it would have changed. And like maybe that's the case, but also maybe not. Like some things come to us and are meant to be brought onto the planet, but they're not meant to be like the $1 million thing, right? And some things are, and we'll always, especially when we start connecting with them through the records or just in general through spirit, we will know, like you'll have that feeling behind it. You'll have that, like, it's like your intuition will tell you as you're working with that thing, you'll be like, oh, this is the thing. And this is not just a 6-month thing. This is a 2-year thing, or this is like this feels like a lifetime thing, right? You'll feel that. And I think a lot of times this happens too when we have like children. So my friend Andrea, she just had her first child 6 months ago. And before he was born, before she was pregnant, she was like, I feel this little soul trying to get into my life. And she's like, and I know there's a soul like ready to get into my life. And she's like, I was shocked actually, because she was not planning on having kids. Like she was like, her husband really wanted children for like the first 5 years of their marriage. And she kept pushing it back, like pushing it back and pushing it back and being like, no, we'll do it later. We'll do it later. And then like one day she's like, I feel like there's a soul trying to get into my life. And literally 2 weeks later, she was pregnant. It was like, boom, the moment she was like, okay, I'm going to accept the soul. It was like, the soul was there. But what was cool is she was able to like communicate with and co-create with the soul before it was even part of her existence. And it was one of those things that like she knew was going to be there for a really long time. And I think our businesses also come to us in very similar ways. They're like these little souls that just like knock on our door. And they're like, hey, I'm here. Hey, I'm here. Hey, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Hey, are we going to do this now? Or is it going to be later? Like, what's the deal? And so it's like, as you start to read the records, you can really tap into that energy and understand, like, not even just from the business perspective, but from your life perspective. Is this a good time? Am I the right person? Does my purpose and the purpose of this business even align? And then like, what's beautiful about businesses and buildings and animals and grass is that all of these things, they're all beings and souls and energies that have also had lifetimes of experience. And so it's really cool is oftentimes something that I'm learning now in my work with reading businesses is that businesses, just like we have intergenerational trauma or like trauma over past lives, businesses do as well. Like businesses have incarnated over time as like many different things, taking on different names similar to us, right? Like, and so occasionally when we're working on something, we might feel resistance. And then we think that the resistance is us. Which is very like egoic and typical of like a human, by the way, to be like, oh, something's not going right. It must be my fault because like everything relies on me, right? Like that's almost where the source of that energy comes from. And it's a total mistake and misunderstanding. And it's okay. Like so much grace and compassion for that, bow to that, but also recognizing that sometimes like maybe when we're feeling that resistance, it's because perhaps our business had been brought to life in this way in the past and didn't work out. This is a really common thing, actually, as people start to tap into their psychic ability. Almost everyone that I've read for and that I've like talked to around this space has had at least one lifetime where they've tapped into their psychic ability and they've been like ridiculed for it or like killed for it or like persecuted for it, right? For their beliefs or for whatever they were practicing or for whatever reason. Same thing happens with like businesses too over time. And so it's always nice to just check in and be like, is this resistance me or is this coming from the thing that I'm working on? Is this me or is this like the actual home that I'm working with, right? Because sometimes we'll have this, I don't know if you guys have had this experience too, where we're like doing every single thing we can to make something happen and it's just like not coming together and things are just always getting in the way. And we're like, oh, maybe it's not meant to be. Or like maybe it is, and maybe the thing that we're working on just needs a little gentle compassion too, like needs a little bit of encouragement, needs like to know that your souls are together in this. It's really fascinating. So again, like don't take my word for ultimate truth. Go practice and experiment and experience, because I think it's just like really fascinating the things that we find when we start to work really deeply. Let's see. Okay, and then the last thing that I'm going to say, and then I will open it up fully for questions because we have about 15 minutes, is mixing the records with other practices. This is a question that I get sometimes. I encourage it. Some teachers like, and rightfully so, like nothing wrong with this, like to respect different practices as their own thing. I personally, when I'm reading the records and I'm struggling, I love to pull down some tarot cards to ask for additional information. It's like, to me, it just like alleviates the stress of feeling like I'm not getting what I need, or feeling like I'm on the cusp of the thing that's there, but like I can't quite translate it. Like I can feel it, but I'm like, I don't know what this means. I love to pull down some cards because then it helps me contextualize and get a little bit more vocabulary to kind of like think through and feel through more deeply. So like I offer that to you as well. If it feels good to you and an integrity to you to mix practices, do it. If it doesn't, don't. So again, like allow yourself to guide yourself into that. But I don't personally believe that there's a wrong way. The one thing I will heed you with is if you do start reading for others and you ever get the feeling, the inkling that maybe you shouldn't read for them, even if they give you permission and they want you to, always listen to that feeling that you shouldn't read for them. If you don't, you'll learn why. Like you'll have an experience that you'll be like, oh, okay. And not that it will be like a terrifying or truly bad experience, but it's almost always like you already know in advance, right? So listen to those gut feelings that come up when they come up, especially if you practice reading for others and experimenting beyond just reading for yourself. Okay, I'm truly going to stop now. I invite any and all questions, thoughts, anything on your heart or your mind, anything that's come up, feel free to hop in. So quiet.
Well, I'm kind of just excited to start it and experience it.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah, and I'll say, so post this call, I will add to the community the pathway that I use so you can practice it. And it's just like for like the way that I have it written is for self. So just the word I is there. You can replace the word I with some of the I's. Actually, you'll intuitively know which ones to replace with the person's name that you're reading for. I just realized I was like, there's a lot of I's here, but you can replace that with the person's name you're reading for if you want to read for someone else. I highly, highly, highly encourage each of you just to reach out to each other as you're practicing and see if you can practice on each other, because it will make reading like exponentially easier when you allow yourself to read for others. So don't wait until you feel like you're getting clear guidance from yourself to start reading for other people. And that's just because when you do both, it will really enhance the guidance that you receive for yourself. Like you'll really start to lean into and trust what you get for yourself. And so I highly, like, there's so many people that I work with that are like, I'm just going to wait until I feel really good about reading it for me. And that's totally great if you feel that. And I can tell you, you'll expand your reading like tenfold if you allow yourself to just try to read for someone else. And I invite you to ask people in the community, because you're already going to know that everyone here is going to like hold a really safe space for you and no one's going to judge you. And you'll be able to know that people will be honest with you if you're getting like weird stuff or if you're not totally right. With that, I will say, like, if you ever are reading for another being and what comes out maybe doesn't make total sense to them or like feels like it's not good, it's very easy to go into a mental spiral of like, oh my God, I'm not reading them right. I don't know what I'm doing. And then to like kind of shut yourself, your connection down, because you're like now worried and in your ego about what it is that you're sharing. So like whoever you do decide to read for when you first start reading, like pick someone that's gentle and that's open, and that will also give you time. So like the first few times I read for others, I read for my best friend Andrea, and she's like totally in the same, like she's into like the woo woo, and she's like super open to a lot of things. She's also like one of the most compassionate people that I've ever met. And so, and it was like a 2-hour reading, because the first time I was reading for her, I was like really trying to feel through and pull through the information and give it to her, and give it to her really well. Whereas like now I could probably give her all of the same information I gave her in 2 hours within a 20-minute time span, right? Like it shifts a lot, but give yourself that time and that grace to practice, and practice again with people in the community, because you know they'll give you the time and the grace, so that you guys can give each other that time and that grace, so that you can feel really like safe and confident and comfortable. And then there are definitely folks in the community who read. So like I know JC Herbert is a reader. She has already volunteered to like be read by anyone. So if anyone's like, oh, I want to like a guinea pig, you can absolutely reach out to her. Christina is a reader. You could absolutely reach out to her. She's really great and she's so sweet. She's in the community as well. It's CHRYS. Marsha is on the call. I was like literally trying to think of, I was like looking at her name, Marsha. I was like, Marsha also, she's an amazing reader. So you can always reach to her. I'm positive that she would be happy to trade time with you, reading and helping you deepen in your practice or your work. Ginny does hypnotherapy if anyone's interested in that. So I'm sure you guys could do some trading there. But yeah, and if you have questions or you're like, oh, I don't know where to start, like message me. That's what we have the community for. So don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always happy to support you. And if like down the road, you're like, I need another session, or like, let's deepen in the records, I'm so happy to do that as well. Even just doing like a community Q&A, or like opening the records together as a group. I was kind of hoping we would do that tonight, but I also figured that I would do exactly what I did and just start talking and not stop talking. So maybe another time we can set the intention to open the records collectively just for that experience. But know that I'm here and that I'm happy to help, and that I'm open to any and everything that may come up in your being or heart.
Could we, you don't have to answer this, but something to like think about, could we set up some group calls to intentionally open the records together and then like share what came up for us?
Oh, that would be amazing. Yeah. I think that would be amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah. If one of you will post a little like in the community, if anyone's interested, and if a few people are interested, I'm so happy to do that and facilitate that. I think it would be really fun and such a cool experiment and experience as well. Okay, well, I'm going to sit here quietly for at least 2 more minutes in case anyone's minds or hearts are moving a little slow. But feel free, if you feel like you've gotten everything that you need, to drop whenever you want to. Or feel free to just sit here quietly with me. Oh, Casey had a question in the chat. Okay, good. She's still here. Can we access pets' lives who have passed away? Yes. You can access pets' lives who have passed away. You can access family members. A lot of times, like, by the way, in your spirit team, if there are folks, even pets that have passed away, a lot of times they stick around with you and you can almost call on them at any time. So this is one of those things, as you develop your work in the records, you'll notice just in like general and regular life. You don't have to be like a medium to do this. You can totally do this. You can also like use a medium or work with a medium if you want like quicker work there, but you can absolutely call on anyone, anything, any entity that has passed, and ask for their presence or their guidance, and they will come to you. And you can ask for a sign to know that they're there as well. So if you're like feeling really disconnected or maybe like tight or something like that, you can always ask like to see a number. You can always ask to see like JC actually yesterday said that her sign that she asked for when she started practicing was pink flamingos. And I love this because it's like so random. But she knows that when she sees one, because it's so random, that it's always like a sign or something beautiful coming in for her. So I love, love, love that. But yes, you can access pets that have passed away. You can absolutely open their records. And then same thing for pets who you have now, you can absolutely open their records. This is the one thing that I've never practiced. Although what I will say is JC, just like mentioning her again, and Shelby in the community, and also Vicky, the three of them all do different types of animal healing. So they would be really great people to message and just ask like, hey, what's up with your work? Because I know JC, I'm pretty sure she reads records for pets. Shelby's like working on animal Reiki. I think JC does that as well. I want to say Vicky does animal Reiki, but she also creates totems for animals. And she speaks with animals as well. And she's also a trainer. So the three of them are like, would be really, really great, because I have no experience actually opening records for animals, although I know that it's completely possible. And I've opened records for a lot of different things, so that are like way weirder than just opening them for an animal. So I 100% trust that you can totally open the records for an animal that has passed or an animal in general. And then I'm going to scroll up to see if I missed anything. I don't think so. Okay. Well, my loves, thank you so much for an amazing session and taking the time to come and listen and put yourself out there and ask questions. I will post the prayer that I use in, I don't know if there's a chat for the event, but I'll make sure you all have access to it. And then feel free to like, again, like keep in touch, talk through the community, make a post to see if people are interested in the group connections. Because if so, I'm totally down to facilitate and host with you guys. I think that'd be really fun. And like, I'm just a message away. So feel free to always reach to me. I'm happy to be here. Thanks, everyone. Have the best night. Oh, and I'll post the recording in the community and either tonight or tomorrow. Bye, all.